The black sedan pulled through the massive iron gates, and Dr. Amelia Richardson felt her heart skip a beat. 2 years of work had led to this moment. 2 years of late nights, countless meetings, and more coffee than any human should consume. Now, as she looked out at the sprawling estate ahead, she knew everything was about to change. The Whitmore family estate wasn't just big, it was the kind of place you see in movies. Rolling green lawns stretched as far as the eye could see, dotted with perfectly trimmed hedges and marble fountains that probably cost more than most people's houses. The mansion itself looked like something out of a fairy tale, with its towering columns and countless windows gleaming in the afternoon sun. Amelia adjusted her blazer one more time and checked her reflection in the car window. At 42, she had built Richardson Tech Solutions from nothing into one of the most innovative companies in the clean energy sector. Her software could revolutionize how major corporations manage their power consumption, potentially saving millions of dollars, and helping the environment at the same time. It was the kind of breakthrough that happened maybe once in a decade. The driver opened her door, and she stepped out onto the perfectly paved driveway. The air smelled like expensive flowers and old money. She had grown up in a neighborhood where the closest thing to a garden was the weeds growing through cracks in the sidewalk, but she had learned to navigate these wealthy circles over the years. Success had taught her how to walk into any room with confidence, even when everything around her screamed that she didn't belong. Her assistant David appeared at her side carrying the briefcase with the contracts. He had been with her company for 5 years and knew exactly how important this day was. The $900 million partnership agreement inside that briefcase represented more than just money. It was validation, proof that her company had made it to the big leagues. "You ready for this?" David asked quietly, his voice mixing excitement with nervousness. Amelia smiled, the kind of smile that had carried her through countless boardroom battles. "I've been ready for this my whole life." The front door of the mansion opened before they even reached it, and Charles Whitmore himself stepped out to greet them. He was exactly what you'd expect from old money, tall, silver-haired, with the kind of confident posture that comes from never having to worry about anything. His handshake was firm, his smile practiced, and his eyes held that particular look wealthy people get when they're sizing you up. "Dr. Richardson," he said, his voice carrying just a hint of surprise, as if he still couldn't quite believe she was really there. "Welcome to our home. I trust the drive wasn't too difficult." "Not at all," Amelia replied smoothly. "Your estate is beautiful. Thank you for hosting us." Behind Charles stood his son Benjamin and daughter-in-law Isabella. Benjamin had the same silver hair as his father, though his was styled in that expensive way that rich young men preferred. Isabella was perfectly put together in the way that only women with unlimited shopping budgets could manage. Every detail from her jewelry to her shoes carefully chosen to display wealth without appearing obvious about it. They exchanged pleasantries as they walked through the front hall, their footsteps echoing off marble floors that probably cost more than Amelia's first office lease. Oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors stared down from the walls, and fresh flowers arranged in crystal vases filled the air with their perfume. Everything was designed to impress, and it worked. "I hope you don't mind, but we've invited a few other industry leaders to join us for dinner," Charles said as he led them toward what he called the East Wing. "Word has gotten out about our partnership, and everyone is quite curious to meet the brilliant mind behind the technology that's going to transform our operations." Amelia nodded graciously, though something in his tone made her pause. There was a subtle emphasis on the word curious that didn't quite sit right, but she pushed the feeling aside. This was business. And in business, you sometimes had to deal with people who saw you as different, unusual, or unexpected. She had learned long ago not to let other people's limitations become her own insecurities. They entered a sitting room that was bigger than her first apartment, where several other guests were already gathered with drinks in their hands. She recognized a few faces from industry magazines and business conferences, CEOs, board members, and the kind of investors who could make or break companies with a single phone call. There were also a few people she didn't recognize, probably family friends or other business associates. As Charles introduced her around the room, she noticed the pattern of reactions. Most people were polite, professional, interested in talking about the technology and the potential impact of the partnership, but there were subtle things, conversations that paused when she approached, glances exchanged between guests when they thought she wasn't looking, and questions that seemed designed more to test her knowledge than to actually learn about her work. One older gentleman, introduced as the head of a major manufacturing company, spent 10 minutes questioning her about the technical specifications of her software. It wasn't unusual for people to ask detailed questions. Her technology was complex and innovative. But there was something in his tone that suggested he was looking for gaps in her knowledge rather than trying to understand the system. "And you developed this algorithm yourself?" he asked, his eyebrows raised in what could have been surprise or skepticism. "The core algorithm, yes," Amelia replied calmly. "Though of course I have an excellent team of engineers who helped refine and implement it. Innovation is rarely a solo effort." Isabella appeared at her elbow with a fresh glass of wine. "How fascinating," she said, with a bright smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "It must be so satisfying to see your little company grow so quickly. Charles tells me you started in your garage?" The phrase "little company" stung, especially since Richardson Tech Solutions now employed over 300 people and had offices in 4 cities. But Amelia kept her expression neutral. "We started small, yes, most successful companies do." "Of course," Isabella agreed, though her tone suggested she thought there was something quaint about the idea. "It's such an inspiring story. Really, shows what's possible these days." The phrase "these days" hung in the air with implications that Amelia chose not to examine too closely. Instead, she steered the conversation back to business, discussing market trends and future applications for clean energy technology. As the evening progressed, she found herself enjoying conversations with several of the guests who were genuinely interested in her work and the potential impact of the partnership. A few even mentioned projects at their own companies where her technology could be useful. It was the kind of networking that made events like this worthwhile, beyond just the immediate business deal. Benjamin Whitmore seemed particularly interested in the environmental benefits of the technology. "My wife and I have been looking for ways to make our own businesses more sustainable," he said. "The younger generation really cares about these issues, and we're starting to see it affect purchasing decisions." It was a reasonable conversation, the kind that happened at business gatherings every day. But Amelia couldn't shake the feeling that something was slightly off about the whole evening. Maybe it was the way certain conversations seemed to quiet when she joined them, or the way some guests looked at her as if she were an interesting specimen rather than a fellow business leader. She had experienced subtle prejudice before. It came with the territory of being a black woman in a field dominated by white men. Usually she could brush it off as other people's ignorance or insecurity. Tonight, though, something felt different. More deliberate, more calculated. But the contracts were ready to sign. Her company's future was secure, and tomorrow would mark the beginning of a new chapter in her business journey. Whatever awkwardness she was sensing, it would all be worth it when the partnership was official and Richardson Tech Solutions had the resources to reach its full potential. As dinner was announced and they moved toward the dining room, Amelia felt a mixture of anticipation and caution. She had worked too hard and come too far to let anyone make her feel small. Tomorrow's signing ceremony would prove that merit and innovation could triumph over any obstacles, and her company would finally have the platform it deserved to change the world. The dining room was even more impressive than the rest of the house. A massive crystal chandelier hung above a table that could easily seat 20 people, and tonight it was set with china that probably cost more than most cars. Fresh flowers created a centerpiece that ran nearly the entire length of the table, and candles flickered in silver holders that caught the light and threw dancing shadows on the walls. Amelia found herself seated in what was clearly the guest of honor position to Charles Whitmore's right. It should have felt like recognition of her importance to this deal, but something about the way Charles smiled as he pulled out her chair made her stomach tighten with unease. She had learned to trust her instincts over the years, and now they were telling her to pay attention. The first course was served by waitstaff who moved around the table like they were performing a carefully choreographed dance. The conversation flowed easily enough. Talk about business trends, econ, omic forecasts, and the kind of industry gossip that always circulated at gatherings like this. Amelia contributed when appropriate, sharing insights about the clean energy sector and fielding questions about her company's growth. But she noticed things. Little things that individually might not mean much, but together started to paint a picture she didn't like. The way Isabella would glance at her husband Benjamin whenever Amelia spoke about her technology. The subtle smirk that crossed the face of the older gentleman who had questioned her earlier when she mentioned her company's recent expansion. The way certain guests seemed to be watching her more than listening to her. As they moved through the courses, the wine flowed freely. Charles was an attentive host, making sure everyone's glass stayed full and keeping the conversation moving. But Amelia limited herself to small sips, preferring to stay sharp for what was supposed to be the most important business dinner of her career. "Ladies and gentlemen," Charles said as the main course plates were being cleared away. "Before we move to dessert, I'd like to say a few words about why we're all here tonight." The table fell quiet, and all eyes turned to the head of the table where Charles stood with his wine glass in hand. This was the moment Amelia had been waiting for, the formal acknowledgement of their partnership, the public recognition of what her company had achieved, and the validation that her years of hard work had led to this incredible opportunity. 2 years ago, Charles began, his voice carrying the confidence of someone used to commanding attention, our company began looking for solutions to modernize our energy management systems. We knew we needed innovative technology, something that could help us reduce costs while also addressing the growing pressure to be more environmentally responsible. So far, so good. Amelia smiled politely and prepared for what she assumed would be praise for her company's breakthrough technology. We looked at dozens of options, Charles continued, from established firms with decades of experience to smaller companies with fresh ideas. What we found was interesting. He paused, and something in that pause made Amelia's smile falter slightly. You see, in today's business climate, there's tremendous pressure to consider factors beyond just the quality of the technology or the track record of the company. Companies like ours are expected to demonstrate our commitment to, shall we say, social responsibility. The room was completely silent now, and Amelia felt her chest tighten. This wasn't going in the direction she had expected. Now, don't get me wrong, Charles said with a laugh that didn't sound entirely genuine. Dr. Richardson's software is certainly adequate for our needs. But what really made this partnership attractive was the opportunity it gave us to show our support for diversity in the business world. The words hit Amelia like a physical blow. Around the table she could see various expressions, some guests looking uncomfortable, others nodding along, and a few, including Isabella, barely hiding their smirks. Charles raised his glass higher. It's not often that companies like ours get the chance to work with someone from Dr. Richardson's background. Her story is quite remarkable, rising from very humble beginnings to build a company that, while modest in scope, has managed to develop technology that meets our basic requirements. Every word felt calculated to diminish her achievements. Adequate. Basic requirements. Modest in scope. These weren't descriptions of a company that had just secured a $900 million partnership deal. Of course, Charles continued, his voice taking on a tone that sounded almost paternal, we'll be providing significant guidance and oversight to ensure the implementation goes smoothly. After all, a project of this magnitude requires experience that can only come from companies like ours with our long history of managing complex operations. Benjamin raised his own glass. It's really quite generous of Father to take on this kind of mentoring role. Not many established companies would be willing to invest so heavily in an unproven entity. Isabella nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. It's almost like corporate charity work, but with the potential for actual returns. Very forward-thinking. The conversation around the table began to shift, with other guests chiming in about the importance of giving opportunities to emerging entrepreneurs and non-traditional business leaders. Each comment felt like another cut, reducing her from a successful CEO who had earned this deal through innovation and hard work to some kind of charity case who should be grateful for their generosity. One guest, a woman Amelia hadn't spoken to much during the evening, leaned forward with what she probably thought was an encouraging smile. "I think it's wonderful how these programs are helping level the playing field. My daughter's school has been doing similar outreach work in underprivileged communities." Another guest nodded sagely. "The government incentives for working with minority-owned businesses certainly don't hurt either. Smart companies know how to take advantage of those opportunities." Amelia sat frozen in her chair, her untouched dessert growing cold in front of her. Every instinct told her to stand up, to defend herself, to set the record straight about who she was and what her company had achieved. But she was surrounded by powerful people in an environment where making a scene would only confirm whatever stereotypes they already held about her. Charles wasn't finished. He seemed to be enjoying his role as the generous benefactor, the wise patriarch sharing his wisdom with the grateful masses. "Dr. Richardson," he said, turning to address her directly for the first time since he'd begun speaking, "I hope you understand what an extraordinary opportunity this represents. Partnerships like this don't come along often for companies in your money situation." The emphasis on situation was unmistakable. Not companies with innovative technology, not companies with proven track records. Companies in her situation, which everyone at this table understood to mean companies led by Black women who had somehow managed to stumble into success despite their obvious limitations. "We're really looking forward to working with you," Isabella added with a bright smile that felt like poison. "Though I do hope you'll be open to our suggestions. Sometimes people who are new to this level of business can be a bit resistant to guidance from more experienced partners." The older gentleman who had questioned her earlier in the evening chuckled. "Yes, well, pride often comes before a fall. Hopefully that won't be an issue here." Around the table, conversations began to fragment into smaller groups, but Amelia caught snippets that made her stomach turn. Comments about affirmative action success stories and diversity hiring gone too far, and what happens when political correctness drives business decisions. She realized that to these people, she wasn't Dr. Amelia Richardson, CEO and innovator. She was a symbol, a token, a way for them to feel good about themselves while maintaining their sense of superiority. Her technology wasn't revolutionary, it was adequate. Her company wasn't successful, it was modest. Her achievements weren't earned, they were gifts from generous white benefactors who were kind enough to overlook her obvious shortcomings. The worst part was the assumption that she should be grateful, that she should smile and nod and accept their condescension as the price of admission to their world. They expected her to play along with the narrative they had created, to be the humble recipient of their largesse, rather than the equal partner she had thought she was becoming. Charles finally sat down and conversations resumed around the table. Amelia felt something inside her crystallize. This wasn't just disrespect, it was a deliberate attempt to put her in what they saw as her proper place. They had never intended to treat her as an equal. The entire evening had been designed to remind her, and everyone else in the room, that no matter what she had achieved, she would always be the outsider looking in. She managed to get through the rest of the dinner, making appropriate small talk when addressed directly and maintaining the pleasant expression that had served her well in countless business situations. But inside, she was calculating, re-evaluating, understanding that everything she thought she knew about this deal was wrong. When the evening finally ended and she found herself back in her hotel room, Amelia sat on the edge of the bed and stared at her reflection in the mirror across the room. The woman looking back at her had built a company worth hundreds of millions of dollars, had revolutionized clean energy management, and had earned the respect of clients and competitors around the world. Tomorrow, she was supposed to sign a contract that would make her rich beyond her wildest dreams. But tonight, she had learned exactly what that contract really meant, and what it would cost her to sign it. The hotel room felt like a sanctuary after the suffocating atmosphere of the Whitmore estate. Amelia kicked off her heels and sank into the plush armchair by the window, finally allowing herself to breathe properly for the first time all evening. The city lights twinkled below her, and she could see her own reflection in the glass. A successful woman in an expensive suit who looked nothing like the charity case Charles Whitmore had described at dinner. She pulled out her phone and stared at it for a long moment. There were dozens of messages waiting. Congratulations from friends and colleagues who had heard about tomorrow's signing, updates from her team back home, and even a text from her 15-year-old dog. Otter wishing her luck. Everyone was so excited, so proud of what this deal represented for Richardson Tech Solutions. But all Amelia could hear were Charles's words echoing in her head. Adequate for our needs. Social responsibility. Corporate. Charity work. Each phrase felt like a slap across the face, designed to remind her that no matter what she had accomplished, some people would always see her success as undeserved. She stood up and walked to the mirror, really looking at herself, for the first time since arriving at the estate. This was the same woman who had graduated summa cum laude from MIT with a degree in computer engineering. The same woman who had worked 3 jobs to pay for graduate school while caring for her sick mother. The same woman who had spent countless nights in her garage writing code and testing algorithms until her eyes burned and her fingers cramped. Her mind drifted back to those early days, when Richardson Tech Solutions was just an idea and a dream. She remembered the first investor meeting, sitting in a sterile conference room while 3 middle-aged white men questioned every aspect of her business plan. They had asked her to explain basic programming concepts that any first-year computer science student would know, as if they couldn't believe she actually understood the technology she had created. "Are you sure you developed this yourself?" one had asked, his tone suggesting he thought she might have stolen the code from somewhere else. She had gotten the funding eventually, but only after proving herself in ways that her white male competitors never had to. Every step of her journey had been like that, working twice as hard to get half the recognition, constantly having to justify her presence in rooms where she was often the only person who looked like her. But she had persevered. She had built something real, something valuable, something that could change how the world thought about energy consumption. Her software wasn't just adequate, it was revolutionary. Companies that implemented her technology typically saw energy cost reductions of 30 to 40% within the first year. Environmental groups had praised her work as a major breakthrough in the fight against climate change. And yet, here she was, being treated like some kind of diversity hire who should be grateful for the scraps from Charles Whitmore's table. Amelia pulled the partnership contract out of her briefcase and spread it across the hotel room's desk. She had read it dozens of times over the past few weeks, but now she was looking at it with fresh eyes. The financial terms were incredibly generous. $900 million over 5 years, with performance bonuses that could push the total even higher. Any business advisor would tell her she'd be crazy to walk away from this kind of money. But as she read through the fine print again, she began to see things she had overlooked before. Buried in the legal language were clauses that gave the Whitmore family significant control over her company's operations. They would have the right to review and approve all major decisions, from hiring choices to product development strategies. They would have access to all of her proprietary technology and the right to modify it without her consent. Most troubling of all was a clause that would allow them to terminate the partnership at any time with just 90 days' notice, while she would be locked into a 5-year commitment with massive penalties for early withdrawal. It was the kind of contract you'd offer to someone you didn't trust, someone you saw as a junior partner rather than an equal. She thought about her employees. Back home, 300 talented people who had believed in her vision and helped build something amazing. They were counting on this deal to secure their futures, to take the company to the next level. Her head of engineering, Kevin, had already started making plans for the expanded research and development budget. Her marketing director, Lisa, was excited about the resources they'd have to reach new markets. Then she thought about her daughter, Zara, who was just starting to think about colleges and career paths. What message would it send if her mother accepted this kind of treatment? What would it teach her about standing up for herself, about knowing her own worth? Amelia picked up her phone and called her mother in Detroit. It was late, but her mom was a night owl who rarely went to bed before midnight. "Baby," her mother's warm voice came through the speaker. "How did it go? Are you officially rich now?" Amelia felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. It's complicated, Mama. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Her mother had raised 4 children as a single parent while working 2 jobs, and she had developed an uncanny ability to hear trouble in her daughter's voice. What happened? Amelia found herself telling the whole story. The awkward conversations during cocktails, the humiliating dinner speech, the subtle and not so subtle reminders that she was different, that she didn't really belong in their world. Her mother listened without interrupting, occasionally making small sounds of understanding or frustration. "So what are you going to do?" her mother asked when Amelia finished. "I don't know. The money would change everything for the company. We could expand globally, hire more people, really make a difference in fighting climate change. But I don't know if I can work with people who see me as some kind of charity case." Her mother was quiet for a long moment. "You remember when you were 12 and that boy at school kept pulling your hair?" Amelia smiled despite herself. "Tommy Richardson. No relation, thankfully." "That's right. And what did I tell you?" "You said that sometimes people try to make you small because it makes them feel big. And you said I had 2 choices. I could let them shrink me down to their size, or I could show them exactly how tall I really was." "Mm-hmm. And what did you do?" "I stood up to him. Told the whole cafeteria that he was picking on me because he was jealous that I was smarter than him. And what happened? He stopped bothering me. And 6 months later, he asked me to help him with his math homework." Her mother chuckled. "People haven't changed much since you were 12, baby. Some folks still try to make themselves feel important by making others feel small. Question is, are you going to let them?" After they hung up, Amelia sat in the dark hotel room and thought about everything that had led to this moment. She thought about the garage where she had written her first lines of code, working by lamplight because the electricity had been shut off. She thought about the first time a major client had implemented her software and seen their energy costs drop by millions of dollars. She thought about the day Forbes had put her on their cover as one of the innovators changing the world. None of that had happened because someone felt sorry for her or wanted to fill a diversity quota. It had happened because she was brilliant, determined, and had created something the world needed. She pulled out her laptop and began typing an email to her board of directors and senior management team. The time difference meant it was early, morning back home, and most of them would be checking their messages before starting their day. "I need to schedule an emergency board meeting via video conference for 6 a.m. Pacific time," she wrote. "There have been developments with the Whitmore partnership that require immediate discussion." As she hit send, Amelia felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the same mixture of terror and excitement that had filled her stomach the day she quit her job at IBM to start her own company. It was the feeling of stepping off a cliff without knowing if there was solid ground below or just empty air. She looked at the contract spread across the desk, at all those zeros that represented financial security beyond anything she had ever imagined. Then she looked at herself in the mirror again, at the woman who had built an empire from nothing but ideas and determination. Tomorrow morning she would have to make a choice that would define not just her company's future, but her own legacy. She could sign the contract, take the money, and spend the next 5 years being reminded daily that her success was somehow lesser, somehow undeserved. Or she could walk away from the biggest deal in her company's history and bet everything on her own worth. For the first time all evening, Amelia smiled. She knew exactly what 12-year-old Amelia would do, and she knew exactly what her daughter needed to see her do. The question now was whether she had the courage to be as brave as the little girl who had stood up to the school bully, or the young woman who had risked everything to chase a dream that everyone else thought was impossible. Outside her window, the city hummed with late-night energy. Millions of people pursuing their own dreams, facing their own challenges, making their own difficult choices. Tomorrow, she would join them in taking a leap of faith, trusting that sometimes the biggest risk is not taking one at all. The video conference call started at 6 in the morning Pacific time, which meant it was 9 a.m. on the East Coast where most of her board members lived. Amelia had barely slept, spending the night rehearsing what she was going to say and preparing for the arguments she knew were coming. One by one, faces appeared on her laptop screen. There was Robert Chen, her chief financial officer, looking concerned as he sipped his morning coffee. Jennifer Walsh, her head of legal affairs, appeared to be in her car, probably driving to her daughter's soccer game. Dr. Michael Torres, the former MIT professor who had been her first major investor, was in what looked like his home office, surrounded by stacks of engineering textbooks. Amelia, Robert Essie, aide as soon as everyone was connected. Please tell me you're not about to do what I think you're about to do. She took a deep breath. I'm not signing the Whitmore contract. The silence that followed was deafening. She could see the shock on every face. The rapid calculations happening as each person tried to process what this meant for the company they had all worked so hard to build. Jennifer was the first to speak. Can you walk us through what happened? Because from a legal standpoint, backing out now could expose us to significant liability. Amelia told them everything. The condescending conversations during cocktails, Charles Whitmore's speech that reduced her to a diversity hire, the contract terms that would essentially make her company a subsidiary rather than a partner. She watched their expressions change as she spoke, seeing anger mix with understanding on some faces, while others remained focused on the financial implications. Look, said Dr. Torres, adjusting his glasses. What they said was obviously inappropriate and disrespectful. But we're talking about $900 million over 5 years. That's more money than most companies see in their entire existence. Robert nodded emphatically. Michael's right. We could use this funding to expand into international markets, hire the best talent in the industry, really scale up our research and development. Think about the environmental impact we could have with those resources. And what happens to our company culture? Amelia shot back. What happens when our employees see their CEO accepting this kind of treatment? What message does that send about our values? It sends the message that we're practical, Robert replied. That we understand business sometimes requires swallowing your pride for the greater good. Jennifer cleared her throat. There's another issue we need to discuss. I've been reviewing the contract terms more carefully since your call, and Robert's right about the expansion opportunities. But Amelia's also right about the control clauses. They're more restrictive than I initially realized. She shared her screen, showing highlighted sections of the contract. Look at this. They have approval rights over any hiring decisions above a certain salary level. They can veto product development projects. They can even require us to relocate our headquarters if they decide it would be more efficient. The room fell quiet as everyone absorbed the implications. These weren't the terms of a partnership. They were the terms of an acquisition disguised as an investment. But surely we could negotiate some of these points, suggested Patricia Kim, their head of marketing. Maybe if you went back to them and explained your concerns. Amelia shook her head. You didn't see their faces last night, Patricia. This wasn't a misunderstanding or poor word choice. It was deliberate. They see me, and by extension our entire company, as something they're doing charity work with. You don't negotiate with people who fundamentally don't respect you. Dr. Torres leaned forward. So what's your alternative? Do you have another deal lined up that I don't know about? Actually, I do. Amelia pulled up her own screen, showing a presentation she had put together during the sleepless hours before dawn. Remember the conversations we had with those European firms last year? And the Japanese consortium that was interested in our technology for their smart city projects? She clicked through slides showing potential partnerships with 3 different international companies. The numbers weren't as large as the Whitmore deal. Together, they totaled about $400 million over the same 5-year period. But the terms were completely different. These companies want to work with us as equals, she explained. They're interested in our technology because it's innovative, not because partnering with us makes them look good. And look at the growth potential. The slides showed market projections for Europe and Asia, regions where environmental regulations were driving massive demand for clean energy solutions. The Whitmore deal keeps us locked into the American market under their control. These partnerships would make us a truly global company, with the freedom to innovate and expand as we see fit. Robert was studying the numbers carefully. The immediate payout is smaller, but the long-term revenue potential is actually higher. Exactly. and we maintain control of our technology, our hiring decisions, and our company culture. Jennifer nodded slowly. From a legal perspective, these contracts are much more favorable. We'd be true partners, not junior associates. But Patricia looked worried. What about our employees? They've been planning on the stability that the Whitmore money would provide. Some of them have families, mortgages, kids starting college. Are we really going to put their financial security at risk because of hurt feelings? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Amelia understood Patricia's concern. As leaders, they had responsibilities beyond their own pride and principles. But she also knew that accepting the Whitmore deal would slowly poison everything they had built. I've been thinking about that all night, Amelia said. And here's what I realized. If we take the Whitmore deal, we're not just compromising our values. We're limiting our potential. Those contract terms would prevent us from taking the kinds of risks and making the kinds of innovations that got us here in the first place. She pulled up another slide showing employee retention statistics. Companies that compromise their core values to chase short-term profits consistently see higher turnover rates, lower employee satisfaction, and decreased innovation. The Whitmore money might provide security for a few years, but it would slowly destroy what makes our company special. Dr. Torres was nodding thoughtfully. There's something to be said for betting on yourself. Every breakthrough we've made happened because we were willing to take calculated risks. This feels like more than a calculated risk, Robert said. This feels like throwing away a sure thing for a maybe. Amelia stood up and walked to the window of her hotel room. Below, she could see people starting their day, some heading to jobs they loved, others trudging to work they tolerated because it paid the bills. She thought about which group she wanted to be part of and which group she wanted her employees to be part of. You're right, Robert. It is a risk. But so was starting this company in the first place. So was turning down that acquisition offer from Microsoft 3 years ago. Every major decision we've made has involved choosing potential over security. She turned back to the camera. I'm not asking you to make this decision blindly. I'm asking you to trust that the same instincts that got us this far won't lead us astray now. The vote was closer than she had hoped. Jennifer and Dr. Torres supported her decision immediately. Patricia took longer to come around, but eventually agreed that the international partnerships offered better long-term prospects. Robert held out until the end, worried about the immediate financial implications, but finally admitted that the Whitmore contract terms were too restrictive to accept. As the call ended, Amelia felt a mixture of relief and terror. In the space of 30 minutes, she had convinced her board to walk away from the largest deal in their company's history. Now she had to figure out how to make that decision look brilliant instead of catastrophic. She called the concierge and asked them to set up a small press conference in one of the hotel's conference rooms. Word had already gotten out about the Whitmore partnership, and several business journalists were in town covering the expected signing ceremony. If she was going to control the narrative, she needed to move fast. 2 hours later, she stood in front of a room filled with reporters, camera crews, and curious onlookers. Some of the same journalists who had covered her rise to prominence were there, along with business bloggers and social media influencers who specialized in corporate news. Thank you all for coming on such short notice, she began, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. I called this press conference to announce that Richardson Tech Solutions will not be proceeding with the partnership agreement we had planned to sign today with the Whitmore Corporation. The room erupted with questions, but she held up her hand for silence. This decision wasn't made lightly. Over the past 2 years, we've worked closely with the Whitmore team to develop what we thought would be a mutually beneficial partnership. However, it became clear that our visions for the future of this collaboration were fundamentally incompatible. She chose her words carefully, avoiding any direct accusations while making it clear that the decision was based on principle rather than business concerns. Richardson Tech Solutions has always been committed to partnerships based on mutual respect and shared values. We believe our technology deserves to be valued for its innovation and potential impact, not as part of anyone's social responsibility initiative. The questions came fast and furious after that. Reporters wanted to know about the financial implications, the alternative plans, and the specific reasons for the breakdown in negotiations. Amelia answered each question with the same calm professionalism that had carried her through countless business challenges. But the real story was just beginning. Even as she spoke to the assembled press, news of her decision was spreading through social media and business networks. The woman who had walked away from $900 million to preserve her dignity was about to become either a cautionary tale about pride coming before a fall or an inspiration to anyone who had ever felt undervalued and disrespected. Either way, there was no going back now. 6 months later, Amelia stood in her corner office overlooking downtown Seattle, watching the morning news on her wall-mounted television. The financial reporter was discussing Richardson Tech Solutions' stock price, which had just hit an all-time high, following the announcement of their successful expansion into the European market. Richardson Tech's bold decision to walk away from the Whitmore deal last year has proven to be a masterstroke, the reporter was saying. The company's alternative partnerships with international firms have resulted in revenue growth exceeding all projections, and their stock price has nearly tripled since the controversial press conference that shocked the business world. It was hard to believe how much had changed. Those first few weeks after walking away from the Whitmore contract had been terrifying. Stock analysts had called her decision everything from brave to career suicide, and the uncertainty had taken its toll on her employees and investors alike. The initial market reaction had been brutal. Richardson Tech's stock price dropped 30% in the first week as investors panicked about the lost revenue. Business magazines ran articles questioning her judgment with headlines like, "When Pride Costs $900 million," and "The Risks of Emotional Decision-Making in Business." But Amelia had kept her focus on the future. Within 2 weeks of the press conference, she was on a plane to London for meetings with the European consortium that had been courting her company for over a year. What she found there was everything the Whitmore partnership wasn't. Genuine respect for her technology, excitement about collaboration, and terms that treated Richardson Tech as an equal partner rather than a charity case. The European deal came together faster than anyone expected. 3 companies, a German engineering firm, a French energy corporation, and a British tech startup, formed a joint venture specifically to work with Richardson Tech on sustainable energy solutions. The initial contract was worth $200 million, over 3 years with performance bonuses that could push it much higher. More importantly, the partnership opened doors across Europe that would have remained closed under the restrictive Whitmore contract. Environmental regulations in the European Union were driving massive demand for clean energy technology, and Richardson Tech was perfectly positioned to meet that demand. The Japanese deal followed shortly after. A consortium of technology companies in Tokyo had been watching the European partnership with interest, and they approached Amelia with an offer to bring her software to the Asian market. The financial terms were similar to the European deal, but the real value was in the market, access, and the opportunity to work on cutting-edge smart city projects. By the end of the first quarter, Richardson Tech had signed partnerships worth nearly $500 million total, still less than the Whitmore deal, but with none of the restrictive terms that would have limited their growth potential. The real vindication came when the environmental impact data started rolling in. Companies using Richardson Tech's software in Europe were seeing energy cost reductions of up to 50%, even better than the results in American markets. The technology was perfectly suited to the more aggressive sustainability goals that European companies faced, and word spread quickly through business networks. Media coverage shifted dramatically. The same business journalists who had questioned Amelia's decision were now praising her strategic vision. Forbes ran a cover story titled, "The CEO Who Knew Her Worth," and Harvard Business Review published a case study about her decision-making process. But the most satisfying vindication came from watching what happened to the Whitmore Corporation. Without Richardson Tech's software, they struggled to meet their own environmental commitments. The alternative solutions they found were expensive and less effective, and their energy costs continued to climb, while their competitors found ways to cut expenses. The real damage to the Whitmore family came from the public relations disaster that followed Amelia's press conference. While she had been careful not to make specific accusations, journalists started digging into the story. Several guests from that dinner party began talking to reporters about what they had witnessed, and the picture that emerged was not flattering. Isabella Whitmore, in particular, seemed to have a talent for making things worse. In an interview with a business magazine, she described Richardson Tech as that little software company, and suggested that Amelia had misunderstood her father-in-law's comments at dinner. The condescending tone of the interview only reinforced the narrative that the Whitmore family saw themselves as superior to their potential partners. Social media amplified every misstep. Videos of Charles Whitmore's previous speeches surfaced, showing a pattern of similar comments about helping minority-owned businesses and giving opportunities to people from challenging backgrounds. What might have been dismissed as poor word choice in the past suddenly looked like evidence of deep-seated prejudice. The boycott started organically. Environmental groups that had been excited about the Whitmore Corporation's sustainability initiatives began questioning whether they wanted to support a company with such questionable values. Several major clients quietly moved their business elsewhere, and recruitment became a challenge as top talent chose to work for competitors instead. The financial impact was severe. Whitmore Corporation's stock price fell 40% in the months following the controversy, and they were forced to sell off several subsidiaries to maintain their financial stability. Charles Whitmore stepped down as CEO, though the family maintained that it was a planned retirement rather than a response to the crisis. The attempted damage control only made things worse. Benjamin Whitmore, who took over as CEO from his father, issued a carefully worded public apology that managed to sound both insincere and defensive at the same time. He claimed that his family's comments had been taken out of context and that they remained committed to supporting diversity in business. But it was too late. The damage was done, and other business leaders took note. In corporate America, reputation was everything, and the Whitmore family had shown that their values were incompatible with the modern business world's expectations. Amelia watched all of this unfold with a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. She took no pleasure in seeing any business struggle, but she couldn't deny that there was a certain poetic justice in how events had played out. Companies that treated their partners with disrespect were learning that such behavior came with real consequences. The transformation of her own company was remarkable. The international partnerships had brought in not just revenue, but new ideas, new markets, and new opportunities for innovation. Richardson Tech's European office in Berlin was developing smart grid technology that could revolutionize how cities manage their power consumption. The Asian division was working on applications for solar energy management that could help developing countries leap ahead in their sustainability goals. Most importantly, the company culture had never been stronger. Employees knew that their leadership was willing to sacrifice short-term profits to maintain their values, and that knowledge had created a sense of loyalty and pride that no amount of money could buy. Turnover dropped to almost zero, and the IT company was consistently ranked as one of the best places to work in the tech industry. The validation came in many forms: industry awards, speaking engagements, and recognition from environmental groups all confirmed that Amelia had made the right choice. But the moment that meant the most to her came during a company meeting 6 months after the Whitmore press conference. Kevin, her head of engineering, stood up during the question and answer session. "I just want to say something," he began. "6 months ago, you could have made a decision that would have made all of us rich in the short term. Instead, you made a decision that preserved our integrity and our independence. Working here doesn't just feel like a job anymore, it feels like being part of something important." The applause that followed was spontaneous and genuine, and Amelia felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. This was what success really looked like, not just financial gains, but the knowledge that she had built something that people could be proud to be part of. A week later, she received a call from an intermediary representing the Whitmore family. They were interested in discussing a new partnership arrangement, the caller explained, with terms that would be more favorable to Richardson Tech. Amelia listened politely, thanked the caller for reaching out, and respectfully declined. Some bridges once burned were meant to stay that way. The final vindication came when Amelia was invited to speak at the Global Business Ethics Conference in Geneva. Standing in front of an audience of CEOs, academics, and government officials from around the world, she shared her story and the lessons she had learned. Success isn't just about the deals you make, she told the audience. Sometimes it's about the deals you walk away from. When you know your worth, when you understand the value of what you bring to the table, you don't accept less than you deserve, even if that means taking a risk on yourself. As she spoke, she thought about her daughter, Zara, now a junior in high school and already talking about studying engineering in college. The decision to walk away from the Whitmore deal had been about more than just business. It had been about setting an example, about showing the next generation that dignity and self-respect were worth more than any contract. The standing ovation that followed her speech was just the beginning. Richardson Tech Solutions continued to grow, continued to innovate, and continued to prove that companies built on strong values could compete with anyone in the world. And Amelia Richardson, the CEO who knew her worth, became living proof that sometimes the biggest risk is not taking one at all.